So today I want to talk about a very interesting topic that one of my friends and a very like an OG supporter of this channel recommended, and that is Jennifer. She basically wanted me to discuss the differences in storytelling and how writers write stories and how writers tell stories. The difference between, East Africa as well as the United States. And this is a very interesting topic. And I have noticed this for a very good reason, because you have to understand, American soft power is very strong across the planet. So for you to really understand this one comprehensively, you have to be raised in a situation where the American soft power, machine, which is Hollywood, cannot really get to you when you're very young. And so I was raised as a semi-nomad in the Horn of Africa in Somalia. So I really did not see television until I was 13 for the first time. And moreover, I mastered, speaking Arabic at the age of 19. Like by 19, I was comfortable with Arabic. And so English and American influence for me were the third layer of culture that I was exposed to. So at first I was exposed to my own culture for the first 10 years. And then I moved to a city and, I moved to villages, right? And by the time I was 13, I was in cities. But then I had very strong Arabic influence. And then by the time I was 20, the Americans started work. Okay, so this means I really had, like my culture as well as, Arabian influence had a lot longer time to shape me and who I am compared to, Americans. And this is going to be very important for this particular discussion. Why? Because you see, not all cultures tell stories the same way. There are major differences between how my culture tells stories versus how Americans tell stories. By the way, I would like to give a very, strong disclaimer here. Nothing is exclusive. These are general trends, right? Exactly. So I have seen Americans who would even earn my mother's respect. Anyhow, you can think of all storytelling occupying this spectrum. This spectrum, to the furthest left, you have plot. In other words, to the furthest left is a story that is very similar to like Michael Bay's, Transformers. There is essentially no character. The purpose of the entire story is a spectacle. And so this spectrum is going to be very important because you see the major distinction between, my culture, which is Darod, which is one of the 9 major cultures that the Somali ethnic group have. Well, that culture, very specifically, the way it differs from Americans is that there is no plot in my culture. The concept of plot has not been invented yet. No one would respect plot, yes, but that concept, it's on its own, is not considered storytelling. Like plot is not storytelling. We would consider plot as spectacle. Like you might as well start dancing to entertain us instead of telling a story, right? Exactly, something like that. So this is why this particular spectrum is very important, because I have traveled also to Arabia, and I've also traveled to Southeast Asia. I've actually been here now for quite a good number of years. And all the differences that I see between these cultures and American culture is that writers in these other cultures differ mainly on how plot heavy the story is, or the percentage of plot the story has, or percentage of the story that is plot. And so this spectrum will be very important to understand the distinction. Okay? And so to the furthest left, we have entirely plot. Think of Michael Bay, think of something like that, or for instance, Terry Goodkind, that author, like Wizard's First Rule. This is where he would be sitting. And like a lot of James Bond movies, if you think about it, this is where it will be sitting. And it's very important to understand on the furthest left, there is only plot. And then on the furthest right, there is only character. And so think of an author, if you are British, think of like an author like the legend Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett is almost entirely character-driven author. I recently finished Mort, and I was talking about how that book is really, like, if all the plot that happens in that book exists to further the major thematic discussion and the character arcs that are happening. So essentially, the plot is even itself an excuse to further write about the characters and to further improve the character writing that is happening. And so this spectrum is very important. So, and now let's talk about the major difference, because this spectrum is going to help us out. You see, the people of Darod, the group of Somali culture that I really belong to, occupy here. We sit entirely on the furthest rightmost extreme. The concept of plot itself does not exist in storytelling from my culture. It literally is not even defined. And so that is going to be the biggest difference between East African, traditional storytelling, because we don't even have a definition for plot. In other words, plot hasn't been invented yet. Now, in my life, I had only heard of the term plot when I was 20 and I left my home country to live in Malaysia for higher education, university, which I'm currently pursuing. So I noticed quite a good number of Indian Bollywood and American Hollywood movies who had very strange parts of the story where the characters were, chasing artifacts and objects for the sake of those objects. And this was when I was young, and I was like 15 or 16 or 17 or 18, and I was starting to see movies from, India as well as America. There would basically be these sections of the story that wouldn't make sense to me. Essentially, plot for me, when I came across it, was like a culture shock. Like, why are they chasing this magical artifact? Where is the lie? Where is the truth? So that weirded me out. Yeah, basically it sussed me out. I didn't have a word to describe this until I had ready access to the internet after I arrived at Kuala Lumpur. Whenever my mother told me folklore or stories she made up, there was always one consistent reality. The story was basically about character arcs, and specific because you see there are two major character arcs. There is external character development or external character arcs where, let's say, someone learns to use the sword, and then there is an internal character development, and that internal character development relates to the lie and the truth. Basically, you can have a positive character arc, you can have a negative character arc, or you can have a test arc. And so, the lie and the truth is one way of talking about it. Another way of talking about it is want versus need. Maybe you are familiar with this. The character wants the bad thing, but they need something else that their flaw blinds them to. Heck, I could even give you another way of talking about it. You could just say positive arc, negative arc, or a test arc. That's another way. The story circle is another way. And another way of putting it, I have a lot of ways of talking about characters because different people just have different ways of talking about the same thing. I've noticed it's just the same thing, but worded differently, Exactly. So another way of putting it is thematic or philosophical discussion. But instead of discussing, you have philosophy that, stances on the topic of on the themes, right? So you have a stance on the theme expressed through a character. And then you have another character who has another stance. And these two characters disagree. And so that way you can have a story where you have opposing or clashing views on the same topic, So like Batman and the Joker, there are a lot of famous examples of this out there. And so a lot of different writers have a lot of ways of talking about it. But you could put it all under one umbrella. And that one umbrella is internal character development. It relates to inside the character. So you see, in East Africa, there is only this. There is literally very little attempt to have plot. In the cities, in the Horn of Africa, in Bosaso, Hargeisa, all of these different places, you will find more American or Indian influence because people grew up in these cities. And, when I came to the cities, I also was exposed to Indian movies. I was exposed to American movies. And people will tell stories for spectacle. In the Bedouin, people only tell stories to have internal character development, so that internal character development can be a discussion about what they experience. Okay? And so that is where East Africans are. That furthest extreme to the furthest right is where you will find traditional Somali storytelling. American stories are actually not the opposite of East Africans. You might think, hey, since this video is East Africa, you might say, hey, Americans must be entirely plot. No, actually, what makes Americans different from East Africans is that Americans, unlike us, are actually vague. Yes, they are. You could actually use another synonym, which is diverse. You could use another word, which is, multivariate, right? They don't sit in one place of the spectrum. There are Americans writing entirely character stories. My mother would really love those guys. They are called literary novelists. Basically, they write literary. This is what literary is about. Someone like Patrick Rothfuss. My mother would really respect the heck out of Patrick Rothfuss, N.K. Jemisin. These are all Americans. And my mother would really grow fond of them. She would come to respect all of them. Yes, because they write mostly character. However, someone like Brandon Sanderson or, by the way, also Terry Pratchett would have my mother's complete respect, because his stories are mostly, if not entirely, for the purpose of the character conflict. But someone like Brandon Sanderson or like Jim Butcher or Scott Lynch or like, these great people, they do have my respect because I am more or less the product of two cultures. But my mother would not be so fond of Brandon Sanderson. She would be like, maybe you should narratively summarize the plot. And so technically the reason why, or the way Americans are different from East Africans culturally, is that Americans don't sit in one place. There is no describing Americans saying, hey, this is where Americans belong to. Instead, Americans are scattered on this entire spectrum. And also, the concept of plot in America carries respect. Because the concept of plot in my culture carries no respect. You write plot, you are actively likely mocked. Okay, like you would not have, respect. You wouldn't get street credit. If you have the best plot in the world, no one would ever bat an eye. People would still be asking the question, where is the story? Because remember, the definition of a story is internal character conflict. If you don't have internal character conflict, you would confuse the heck out of my mother. Yes, the way I was confused when I was young. Luckily, I have had a lot more time to interact with Americans, and so I can come to understand, hey, they respect plot, and, if someone writes very good plot in America, they're basically like, good or respected. Like, for example, Brandon Sanderson, he's as critically acclaimed as an author would get. But if you were to put him in East Africa, half of his credit would have to be cut off, because, in fact, most of Sanderson's credit does come from plot. Quite a lot of critics don't really respect a lot of his characters. But no one has ever really talked shit about Brandon Sanderson's plots, because they are as good as fantasy plots get. This guy, in my opinion, writes the best fantasy plots in the world. Yeah, and so these are the two major differences between East African storytelling and American storytelling. It is that East African storytelling is one thing. American storytelling is many things. It is entirely diverse. It is on all of this spectrum. And another thing that Americans differ on is that plot carries respect. In my culture, plot will give you either nothing, because you'll confuse the heck out of the elders or the people, okay? Or you'll actively be mocked. People will still be asking the question after you finish the book, where was the story, I wonder? So now we understand the major differences between East African storytelling and American storytelling. Well, let me talk about plot in East Africa, because sometimes, by virtue of telling a story, the character having an external objective go to this place and grab this object, for example, could be inevitable. Yes, because you're trying to tell a character story, and maybe the character wants gold, or maybe the character wants money. So let's say you're trying to talk about a particular thematic discussion, or like, a lie and a truth. A lie could be, hey, money makes me happy. The truth could be, money doesn't make you happy. Accepting yourself, family, basically being with your own kind, with your own kin, exactly, things like these can make you happy, and in fact they can give you long lasting happiness. So you're going to write a story where you have this as the objective. You have the lie clearly established. Money doesn't give you happiness, but the character believes initially, for instance, money makes you happy. This would be my mother would be very excited to sort of put this story together, because she would actually understand there is a story here, there is a character story here. Remember the want versus need. This would be considered a positive character arc. There are a lot of ways of saying the same thing, but I hope you get what I'm talking about. So to expand this, you might have a heist plot, where the character wants money, so they put together a squad and they go on a heist. So this plot is literally inevitable, because you're trying to express this particular, the character's desire and fire for getting more money, and yes, for character writing. And so the heist, meaning the plot, has merged with the character. You have now become an American. However, this can still happen in East Africa. The only major way it can be different is that Somalis will not expand the plot. Remember, the objective is the character. So Americans, what they will do is they'll have like a whole shtick, they'll have a whole shtick where technically you will have, gather the squad, right? The squad will have to argue with each other. There'll be disagreements. There'll be entire subplots within this plot. There'll be setbacks. I mean, I remember like Brandon Sanderson had a whole video talking about a heist plot. Somalis will not do any of that. In fact, there will be something called narrative summary. Narrative summary is basically recapping the story. So they got together and they got the money from the bank and they ran out in the middle of the night. Literally, my mother might even do this because she wants to get to a point where these people are fighting over the money and they're killing each other. Yes, and in fact, the protagonist might have to kill his own brother for the money, because he believes this money will bring him happiness. And by killing his own brother, for that money, he suddenly realizes money that did not make me happy. I just killed my own brother for the money. So my mother would not be interested in getting the squad together, the setbacks, and so on and so forth. What she would be interested in is, okay, so they have the money now. Okay, they got out of the bank in the middle of the night. They have the money. Congratulations. Okay. Now we have the money, let's split the money. So maybe there are disagreements. And maybe the main protagonist, maybe two of his brothers are with him, right? And he starts conspiring against his own blood. And he starts harming his own family. So you understand this? So Somalis would entirely jump over this plot. They would go as far as to summarize it in 2 sentences or a sentence, because plot, it would not have the definition of a story. It would have the definition of nonsense. Okay. And so there you go. The difference between East African storytelling and American storytelling is that East Africans they are fixed. They have one highly specific definition for storytelling, and it is internal character conflict. For instance, my mother would really love Arcane. She would love Arcane. I finished it recently. Exactly. She would really be only in love with one character, Jinx. She would really love Jinx because of all the changes that she goes through. So it's really important. I could give you more examples. Like in the Stormlight Archive, The Way of Kings, Shallan would have to go. So Kaladin would have my mother's respect, but Shallan would be heavily annoying my mother because where is the story? She's basically asking the question, where's Kaladin? she's asking the question, where is Dalinar? So Dalinar would also be Stain because he also goes through a test arc and he also goes through a positive arc. Technically, as long as you have internal character conflict, you are good. Mistborn, for instance, if you can see, it is mostly plot. So it sits on the left side of the spectrum. The Way of Kings, written by the same author, is mostly character. In fact, vastly character. I mean, Dalinar has a character arc. Kaladin has a slight negative arc, a minor negative arc, right? And a minor positive arc. And then he has a major test arc. I mean, it's all over the place, like character arcs after character arcs after character arcs. So the same author, this is what I mean, right? You know, Americans are very, very, very hard to define because look at this guy. It's the same author, Brandon Sanderson, but at one point, with one era, one Mistborn, he's on the left side of the spectrum. And on the right, with Way of Kings, he literally published it like 3 years later. He's on the mostly right. Yeah, like he just fluctuates. And it's very natural for Americans. It's not natural for us because we mostly prefer, like, if you're going to write, you always write The Way of Kings. You never write Mistborn. Other famous fantasy books, The Blade itself, written by Joe Abercrombie, is mostly character. You can see 5th season, my mother would vibe with this book. It's vastly character. Stormfront, which is the first book in Dresden Files, it is actually mostly plot. And Shadow and Bone, this other book, is mostly plot. Six of Crows, mostly plot. Name of the Wind, vastly character. And A Game of Thrones, of course, the first book in A Song of Ice and Fire, it is vastly character. Like, the plot itself exists to test the character. Like, Ned Stark going to the corrupted world of the corrupted city of King's Landing is technically the prophet coming to the terrible people because they test his character. His character is tested. So, like, this whole murder, this whole mystery, it is respected because George R. R. Martin is an American. Yes. Okay. But that exists for the purpose of testing the character of Ned Stark. That would be the difference between East Africans and America. How about other places that I have been to? I have been in Southeast Asia now for like some 4 years. Soon it will be 4 years. And I have lived in Malaysia. I've been in the Philippines for a brief time, so I will not really talk about the Philippines. I will talk about Malaysia. I have to really admit that the Malays, they know how to tell a story. They know how to write characters. Malays are very impressive character writers, and they would have my mother's respect immediately. Of course, you have the inevitable American soft power. American soft power is like, it is literally inevitable. I have come to accept that. You cannot escape from American influence. And so there is some plot. However, it is the way I like it. So there is a proxy plot. They have plot, but the plot is there in order to help tell the character story. Also, I've also been to the Arabian Gulf. I've stayed in UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Oman. And in those areas, they are also mostly character driven. And in fact, they also have a very specific character writing. Because Somali people will write negative arcs and tragedies a lot of the time. We love to write tragedies like it's Christmas, baby. We really love to write tragedies, but Arabians love to write positive character arcs. I don't know why, but I think it might be because in Arabia, a lot of storytelling is used as a means to teach. A means to teach. There has to be like a takeaway, and so if you write tragedies, there's no takeaway. There's just a warning. Don't do this, okay? You'll die or something terrible will happen. But yes, they love positive arcs specifically. So they don't just write about characters all the time in the sense that they don't write a lot of test arcs and they don't write a lot of negative arcs, but they definitely do write a lot of positive character arcs. And I love Indian stories as well. Bollywood, I used to really love the music, the choreography, all of it. It's just amazing spectacle. However, it is difficult to not notice how a lot of Bollywood movies are mostly test arcs. Test arc, you know this one if you've been paying attention to the video. Basically, it's the flat character archetype. This is the most, hands down, underrated character writing tool. For Americans, if you are an American and you want an example from your own country who writes fantasy, Brandon Sanderson would be a typical example of this. Hold on. Robin Hobb. Forget about Brandon Sanderson. Robin Hobb is the queen. She is the American queen of writing test arcs. In fact, she is so good at it, it almost sounds like she's writing tragedies. Yes, but she's not writing tragedies. She's just writing very good test arcs. And she doesn't really have a lot of mercy for our homeboy, the most beloved fantasy protagonist of all, Fitz Chivalry. So, in India, they have the prophet archetype. And Bollywood really loves a good guy. Like, they love a good guy. In America, they love a good guy, exactly. But in India, they love a good guy, okay? And they believe in this character, this good guy, believes in the truth all the time, and the world around them is corrupt. So this is even true for the romances. Famous Eastern example is the Buddha, okay? Famous Western example is also Jesus Christ. And a famous Middle Eastern example is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there you go. Technically, in Bollywood, they have a lot of test arcs. Remember, there is nothing exclusive to any culture, okay? Nothing is really exclusive to any culture. Like, Americans can write characters as well as we can write them, and I can write plot as well as Americans. The issue is, of course, because of my upbringing, it was easier for me, and it still is easier for me to this very day, after writing some 20 books, characters. Like, it is easier for me to write characters. From the get-go, if you have starting out for the first time, if you are Somali, you would have a stronger grip on character writing compared to an American. However, you would have zero grip on plot. So an American would have to, study less to write good plot, but you would have to, do a lot of studying like I had to understand what plot is on a more comprehensive or deeper level, right? And so there you go. Character writing and plot writing, or any of these mixes, are not specific to any culture. The ability to write is not specific to any culture. However, because of the influences, starting out means you just have to learn more because someone else's culture prepared them from a very young age. And there you go. This was the discussion that was requested, and it's going to take me forever to edit this one. No problem. I'll knock it out. I'll try to do it. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and if you did, please consider subscribing. More important than all of that, comment down below. What do you think of this topic? Where do you sit as a writer on this spectrum? Are you like Brandon Sanderson 50-50, or like Jim Butcher? Or are you like my mother? Or are you like N.K. Jemisin or Joe Abercrombie? These authors that are mostly character, or like Terry Goodkind, who's just mostly plot. Tell me down in the comments below. I hope that you enjoyed this. Have a nice day. Bye bye.